When we pay attention to the stories that most move us, we begin to learn what is at our core.
Welcome to The Lisa Show, where we take a good look at life. Hey, it's Lisa. My mother is an incredible storyteller. In fact, she's a professional one. She told a funny story for the talent portion of her Miss Orem competition to pay for her last semester in college, and then went on to be a storyteller in the library, and later to teach in elementary school where she, again, told stories. She also went around to the local schools when we were little, telling stories from Nebraska's history, enacting famous historical figures. She also went on to have 5 children, and you guessed it, she read to us most every night. I remember she would tell us the story of the Crooked Mouth family. It was a silly story, and each character required a different, distinct contortion of my mom's mouth. We would watch and listen in awe at my mother's Crooked Mouth family story. It was funny, touching, unusual, and distinct, just like my mother. After listening to my mother tell us stories of every kind, night after night, other teachers' voices felt flat and uninteresting in comparison with Shauna Valentine. And that voice became the voice in my head for the rest of my life. Storytelling isn't just a pastime. It's a powerful way to connect with others, and one we often overlook and underestimate. That's why I brought in the only man I know who could hold a candle to Shauna Valentine, my friend, colleague, and host of the Appleseed Storytelling podcast, Mr. Sam Payne. The thing you need to know about Sam is that he doesn't just tell stories when he's on the clock as a host and performer. He is a walking storybook. I can't think of a day I've spent with Sam when he doesn't share some sort of fascinating or tender or funny account with the people he's around. But as Sam will tell you, he doesn't own the market when it comes to stories. We all have interesting stories to share. The problem is, we often think of storytelling as a trivial part of life, but it is not. It's important, and more than we realize. Sam is here to explain why. He'll talk about why storytelling is essential to our relationships, our family culture, and our understanding of ourselves. He'll also give some tips for better storytelling. And of course, you'll hear some of Sam's stories along the way. Here's Sam. I'm not going to say this is a very special episode of The Lisa Show, though, because I know you hate that.
Because that wouldn't be true.
Yes, it would. But I did have to say that just to make you laugh. Sam, thank you so much for having this conversation. You and I have spoken behind the scenes a lot about our families, our lives. And I think you and I connect on this idea of, storytelling is where it's at in a unique way that maybe a lot of people underestimate. And we're here to say, no.
Yeah, I feel that way. I feel like finding the words to give voice to the things that happen to you and to your family can give a lot of shape to those things, right? And suddenly you find yourself having a family culture, that you can point to and that can help you through hard times and that can, storytelling is at the heart of all that.
I think it's at the heart of life, and so I appreciate your time. I want to back up a little bit. You are what is known as a professional storyteller. I would love for you to give me a little idea of your background, how you introduce yourself to people, and professionally what you do.
Yeah, it's rough. There's not quite an elevator pitch that will sum it up, right? I kind of began my creative life as an actor. But after a long time of kind of being an actor as a creative person, I turned myself to writing songs. And there was a kind of utility to that. But my songs were just dense enough, that I found myself kind of explaining them.
Let Let me tell you what this means.
Let me tell you about this song, and then I'll sing the song, right? And that's kind of how that went. And those explanations, that patter kind of took on a life of its own. And then somebody in kind of the platform storytelling community, these folks who tell stories on festival stages all over the country, kind of looked at what I was doing and said, there's a place where people are doing that, and opened a door. And through that door, I walked and now spend quite a lot of time doing that, telling stories, singing songs. And then, of course, I host the Appleseed, which is such a delight for me and has been for so long, bringing great stories to audiences.
I love that. So I want to talk about the impact of storytelling in your personal life as well. So I'd be so interested in knowing what you have learned about storytelling by being a husband or a father or a friend.
When I was a kid, and maybe you've had this experience, there was a kind of thing that happened in the life of every family, and that's when the oldest members of the family got really old and you thought you were going to lose them. You'd put a tape recorder in front of them, and everybody would gather around and hear grandma's stories or hear grandpa's stories. I had a very potent experience with my grandfather, who was a prisoner of war in World War II, but I kind of played a lot of those experiences a little bit close to the vest. And then at a family reunion one time, my 8-year-old son said, "Grandpa, tell me about your World War II experiences." And in a way that he had never opened up to any of us before, kind of opened up to my 8-year-old son, and everybody gathered around, and my brother happened to have a recording device. And so we have this recording of my grandfather telling his World War II experiences in a way that may not have happened had my son not said, "Grandpa, tell me the story," And that's an experience that a lot of families have, somebody having the impulse to capture that before they go. Yeah. But I learned a big lesson that kind of changed my attitude about family storytelling during the pandemic. My siblings are all over the country, all over the world. I've got a sister in the UK and brothers all over the map. And in 2020, somebody had the idea of, in kind of the darkness and separation of the COVID era, and we had all discovered how to use Zoom. Yeah. Like the whole world learned how to use Zoom.
Oh, this is easy. Click. Yeah. Let's do it.
We thought, let's get together and check in on each other. What turned out to be every week, every Sunday, we would gather on Zoom and just talk for a couple of hours. And that started in about June of 2020, and it's still going on. The last time we got together was yesterday.
I love that.
And we spend a lot of that time sharing memories. It's been just this really kind of marvelous time of kind of cementing some of the experiences that have defined our relationships over our entire lives, giving words to those things. And it has taught me that storytelling impulse can be a living impulse among living generations, and not just something you do at the end of somebody's life to gather their stories before they leave us. It's been an enormous lesson to me.
Oh, I love that, because that is exactly like what we want, I think, of connecting with other human beings. You mentioned coming together with your siblings during COVID. I feel like we're still living the effect of saying, oh, no, this connection needs to be intentional and deliberate, and it is as important as the air we breathe and the water we drink. And strengthening that, or using storytelling as an opportunity to do that, can be so connecting to families. And I'm wondering, for those who are listening and thinking, oh, that sounds so great, but I don't even know if my family has stories. Yeah. What would you say to that person?
I have a box in my storage that contains nothing that I put in there. It's all stuff my mom put in there. In there are high school English papers. Mm-hmm. In there are some of the first things I ever drew when I was 3 years old, 4 years old. In there is a newspaper article about a contest I won. It was an elementary school contest in which you had to draw a picture of something that you might do in an emergency. And I drew a picture of me calling the fire department. And I won a first aid kit. And they put me in the local newspaper. And in there is that little, that little thing. And I didn't do any of it. My mom did all of it. But we often don't recognize the foundational things of our lives as they're happening to us. It's not all that often that we say, this thing that's happening to me right now, this is going to be important. Sometimes, of course, we do.
Yeah, sometimes, but not
often
always.
we don't. And I'm so thrilled that my mom thought to mark some of those things.
Wow.
That's a box. It's just one box of stuff, but it's filled with this kind of chronicle of some of the important things that happened to me. I tell you that story because I want to illustrate how vital simply marking those things is. It's not that things don't happen to us. It's that we just fail to mark them. We fail to put a little stake in the ground by saving an object or writing something down or filing something away in our memory where we can get easily to it, or by talking to the person that we're with by saying, I want to remember this. Then those things become accessible later on. And so often we don't do that. And when you talk about building the kind of useful richness that storytelling can bring to a family, right? Half the battle is in just marking the things as they're happening. Marking things that go by, keeping a journal, taking some pictures. And again, an important one for me is just simply, in addition to taking the picture, turning to the person and saying, I want to remember this. This was a great thing,
I love that. I think that sometimes we think it has to be so formal in a way. I was encouraged to do journal writing when I was young from my, mother. I've encouraged all my kids to keep a journal to the point that it is a family joke now about, mom's going to give us another journal. We're starting a new thing. It's called journal writing. They all laugh. And they don't do it. But I had a mentor suggest something different, that everybody has these different stories that happen to them all day, every day.
Yeah.
We all live 24 hours every day.
Yep.
It's the same amount of time.
Yep.
And just to write one sentence of something that happened to you.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, and not have to, explain it. And this is how I felt. And this is where the sun was hitting my face when I had this realization. It doesn't even need to have all that detail of like, I had this conversation with this person about this, or this happened to me. And so I just want to echo that idea of marking it, just to kind of remember, because it is kind of interesting to go back and read those and how much it jogs your memory. Like, I remember that.
I went to a funeral some months ago of the father of one of my dear friends from high school. And I heard every one of those kids, now grown with their own families, talk with great fondness, with emotional fondness, with tears running down their face, about how their dad did not fail to teach any of them how to use a broom. In the kitchen. After a meal, he would say, all right, who doesn't know how to use a broom? And he'd put a broom in somebody's hand and he'd make sure they knew how to sweep a floor.
And they're not thinking, what a cherished memory.
That's right. They're not thinking what a cherished memory. But over those experiences in the kitchen, lessons were taught, stories were shared, stuff was passed on, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, when the dad passes away, every one of those kids said, the broom, with tears running down their face. I tell you that story because you just told me a story about your kids going, oh, mom's journals. It's just a
write it down.
It's a joke,
we get it,
right?
Mom.
At your funeral, there will be tears and memories about your tendency to keep a journal, and you're pushing that on your kids, and they will push it on through the family line. It would be really cool if that happened before your funeral, too.
Wouldn't it? I know. Just like my family band. But it's like...
Yeah. Sometimes we think we're pushing a little bit too hard, and sometimes our kids roll their eyes and they say, oh, come on, Dad. There's a formality to that, that almost makes that a futile exercise. But in those moments, over a milkshake or on a long drive, when you have opportunity to say, the thing that's happening to you in your life reminds me of something that happened to me in my life. That can be a more potent way to transfer the important information that we're trying to transfer to the people in our lives. For example, I am, by every measure that has ever been devised, I am an introvert. Right? I've got a son who, among a sibling set that is kind of full of extroverts, is an introvert. And he's kind of wrestling with that. And he and I had a conversation. He lives with his wife and child in Illinois, and I live in Utah, and so we communicate by phone. And we were in a conversation the other day, and he told me a story about something that had happened to him. He was feeling a little bit challenged in one way or another because his tendencies as an introvert had caused him to meet something in such and such a way, and I felt to meet it with a story of my own.
Right.
And I just wanted to say, I understand how you feel, and here's a story from my life. Following that impulse with some care and responsibility can really give rise to what begins to define itself as the culture of your family.
Right.
If we can point to the things that we do, the way we deal with problems, the things that happen to us, and we can give kind of responsible and thoughtful life to the stories of those things, then we can look at our family and say, that's the kind of family we are. That's the story that has arisen from our interactions with one another and the things that have happened to us.
I've given a lot of advice to fellow parents over the years, and they've given a lot to me. But I'm not sure I've ever heard tell more stories in those conversations as we swap tips. But we should tell more stories. They are the magic sauce for families. With the help of a story, we can approach our children with important ideas without them tuning out. We can create a shared family culture, we can forge bonds, and we can mark the moments of our lives. But the power of stories doesn't stop there. Stories can also help us better understand others and ourselves, especially if we're willing to ask for other perspectives.
We tend to feel like the things that happened to us belong to us.
Yes.
And we tend to feel like we have a really comprehensive view of those things. After all, we were there.
Yeah.
Right?
It was our life. It happened to us.
It happened to us. But there aren't very many experiences that we have in complete solitude. Often the experiences that we have in company with other people. And saying, this is what this looked like to me. What did it look like to you? Can be a really great question. I mentioned my siblings and I getting together and having some of those conversations, and that's very much a part of our conversation.
Oh, I'm sure.
My younger siblings will say, this is what such and such a thing that happened to us looked like to us, and the older siblings will say, I remember that, and that's not what it looked like to me, and we'll, on we'll go. There's kind of an important example in my life of that phenomenon, and that is when I was 10 or 11 years old, my two little brothers and my dad and I went on a hike together. My dad took us up to a waterfall, It was the biggest hike we'd ever taken, and we were, very proud of ourselves for coming along like we did. It resulted in the brother just younger than me, my brother Joe, at 8 years old maybe, nearly going over the waterfall. He fell into the creek and nearly went over the waterfall. It was a really, really close call. I realized through that experience how much I loved my brother. My brother and I, we fought like cats and dogs when we were little kids, and this kind of changed it for me. I thought, oh, good heavens, I almost lost that brother that I hate. I really love him.
Right. Yeah.
And as a grown-up person, that's a story that I tell a lot, right? What I've told you is a very abbreviated version of it.
It was a very harrowing experience.
Yeah. I've even written on stage material about that experience,
Yeah.
And some years ago, as a thoroughly grown-up person, I was sitting across the table from my brother in his home in Tennessee, and we were eating a pizza, and I said, tell me about nearly going over the waterfall. Yeah. I know that story, you know that story, but tell me that story. I haven't heard you tell that story in a long time. And the first thing he said was, oh yeah, almost going over the waterfall. Were you there? And I thought, oh, you got to be kidding me. My perspective and his perspective are so different from each other and so useful to one another. There were so many gaps that I could fill in and so many gaps that he could fill in, and I learned so much from him. And so we were able to just fill in those gaps for one another, and we had a really memorable evening together. If you're looking for ways to bring storytelling to the table, one way is to seek out the other people in the stories, right, who are still with us. Sometimes they're not with us anymore.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't have access to them anymore. But if we do have access to them, we can go to them and we can say, listen, I know you know this story, but tell me about it from your point of view. And the learning that happens in an environment like that is just really rich. It's really fun.
Oh, I love that. It's so connecting.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if when you think about storytelling in your life and how that has helped you through sort of difficult times, have you experienced that maybe through storytelling?
I have 100 times in my life, 1,000 times in my life, 1,000,000 times in my life said, I know how I feel. I know what I think. I'm just having a hard time expressing it.
Yes.
Right? You've said that. Everybody said that.
Yeah.
And now I question that. Now I think I'm having a hard time expressing it. So do I know how I feel? Do I know how I think? And finding the words to clarify and define the things that I think and the things that I feel and the things I believe has been an invaluable exercise for me. That's the impulse that I'm following. I really want to figure stuff out. That's what I'm trying to do.
It's a worthy pursuit.
And if I can find the words for something that I believe or that I think or that I feel, that feels significant to me. That feels like a triumph to me. Because we live in a world where so much is said without a great deal of understanding.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Yeah.
And even within our own relationships and our own families.
Yeah.
And we just say things and we know that words matter.
Yeah. I'll sometimes say to my wife, I'm going to say something that I think might be true. Let me give this a shot. Right?
Oh, I like that. I like that qualification.
Yeah.
Instead of, I'm going to say something with a capital T.
Yes,
Truth.
yes. Or sometimes I'll find myself saying, I want to say something, but it's the first time I've ever said it, and I might get it wrong.
Yeah.
I might want to go back and say it better, you know. And it has blossomed into a pretty wonderful way to give each other some grace, you know.
Oh, I love that. And this makes me think of, this is why we retell those important stories in our families, in our relationships.
Yeah.
Tell me again from your perspective what happened.
That's right. That's right.
I have heard you say that it's important to cast yourself in every role of the story, and I wonder what you mean by that.
Yeah, I'll tell you where that started to come from. It's when I started to become familiar with the parables of Jesus in the Bible. And frankly, sitting in Sunday school classes and things like that, right? You would interact with people who would think, well, the person who we are in this story is such and such. This notion that we were to identify with a particular character in the story, often the hero.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, we do.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy way to think of yourself as pretty heroic. You know, cast yourself as the hero. That's a little bit snarky, right? Because people don't always do that. People are like, oh no, I'm supposed to be this person in the story because that's who I'm supposed to try to emulate. It's more than just casting yourself as the hero. But I think you should cast yourself as everybody. We tend to think of ourselves in the furrow that we have plowed for ourselves. And we tend to, just like water running down a furrow, our thoughts about ourselves tend to run down that furrow that we've plowed, right? And when we start to cast ourselves as everybody in the story, when we look at the story of the prodigal son from the Bible and we cast ourselves as the son and as the father and as the brother and as the folks with whom the prodigal son became acquainted in his wild city days, you know.
And the mother.
And the mother. Cast yourself as everybody in the story and you find yourself learning stuff outside the furrow.
Oh, yeah.
Right? I think we learn a lot when we cast ourselves as both the hero and the villain and the bystander. Every one of those people has something to teach us.
But storytelling can help in that.
Yeah.
How can it help us to really understand who we are and our own individual identity, not even our relationship to other people?
Some years ago, many years ago, I was the leader of a jazz quintet. And this jazz quintet had a gig somewhere. And I called the guys and just to give them the details of the gig. And I called my saxophone player, wonderful saxophone player named Dennis Zwang. And I called Dennis and I said, hey, the gig's on Friday. And he responded by saying, oh yeah, there's a gig on Friday. And he seemed kind of spaced out, frankly. And I said, "What's going on, Dennis?" I found out that his father had died that day. It was his father who had taught him to love music. I said, "Oh, good heavens, we'll be fine. Do what you need to do. Don't worry about the gig. We don't need a sax player on Friday. Stay with your family." And he said, "No, I'd like to be there. I'd like to come play the gig." He said, "The funeral will be earlier in the day." And he showed up at the gig in the suit that he'd worn to the funeral, and he kind of kept to himself. And we didn't know exactly how to relate to him. We found ways to tell him that we loved him and that we were grateful that he was with us and to give our condolences for his loss. And then he played his heart out. I mean, he just brought that place down with his saxophone playing that night. There's a beautiful George Gershwin song, "Our Love is Here to Stay." It's very clear, our love is here to stay, not for a year, but ever and a day. In time, the Rockies may crumble, Gibraltar may tumble, they're only made of clay, but our love is here to stay. And we did that song that night. And when you're the leader of a jazz band, part of what you're doing is you're handing off solos, right? You're saying, "All right, now guitar, take a solo. And now how about a drum solo now?" And you're kind of making eye contact. You're communicating with everybody and made eye contact with whoever had taken the last solo and then made eye contact with Dennis and said, "Take a solo on this song." And he closed his eyes and just played "It's Very Clear, Our Love is Here to Stay," that memorial for his father. And he played for 3 or 4 minutes just on his own, And the song kind of faded, and then Dennis had the last word. The saxophone was the last thing out in that song. That saxophone prayer is one of the most meaningful things that's ever happened to me on stage. And everybody felt it. And after telling that story one time, my wife looked at me and said, "That's a core story for you, isn't it?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, it's a story about the sacredness of musical expression. It's a story about fathers and sons. It's a story about the difficult and beautiful exercise of passing from this life to whatever comes next." She said, "Those are the things that are at the very core of you. This is a core story, isn't it?" And I thought, "Oh yeah, I guess it is." When we pay attention to the stories that most move us, we begin to learn what is at our core, right?
Yeah.
There are themes that arise in our storytelling, in the books that we love best, in the movies that we cry hardest at. And there are themes that arise. And if we're careful about observing that, we can learn what is at our core, That's some of what storytelling does for me, the individual.
Wow, teach us who we really are, what we really want.
That's right, yeah.
What do we value? What do we want from life? Thinking about the stories we tell might just give us a peek into who we are, which is now making me a tad concerned about why I'm always telling the incredibly embarrassing story of ruining one of my best friend's birthdays with a flash mob gone wrong at a restaurant that I thought was a good idea that was not a good idea. And I guess that's what therapists are for, but I digress. Now you might be thinking, message received. Storytelling is important, but I'm not a talk show host. I don't talk for a living. I don't have a rubber face. I have just the one voice. That's it. The thought of being a storyteller feels unnatural and uncomfortable, and I'm not even sure where to begin. Well, Sam has some great advice on how we can all dip our toes into the waters of storytelling and what we need for a good story in the first place.
You and I have both had the experiences where somebody says, "Have you ever had an experience with this?" And we've had 100 experiences with that, but we draw a blank. Yeah. We are full of stuff, but it's sometimes tricky to access. And there are sometimes kind of interesting little triggers that can help us. I love, for example, important objects. We surround ourselves with objects that we like, that are meaningful to us. If I go to your office, I'll find a lot of those objects.
Yes, you will.
If you go to my office, you'll find a lot of those objects. And it can be a really interesting doorway to some pretty cool storytelling to say, where did you get that? Why do you have that on your desk? And on comes a story.
Oh, yeah, just from an object.
Yeah, just from an object.
The things we keep, the little knickknacks or baubles or paintings or photos.
That's right.
Yeah, they
That's
mean
right.
something.
They all mean something. They
do.
all mean something. And they're nice little triggers when you're reaching for something to talk about with your kids or when you're reaching for a story to tell. That's a really great window.
Are there basics of storytelling that maybe most people don't know, that if they were aware of it, that it would help them to tell better stories?
We have a tendency when we're trying to tell stories to try to be more theatrical or more storytelly.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
There are all kinds of things that we do in the name of investing in technique. When in reality, there are just some kind of vital things we're trying to communicate with a story. One of the foremost storytellers in the United States of America is a guy named Donald Davis. And I quote Donald Davis, all you're trying to do is get what's in your head into somebody else's head, right?
Yeah.
And the things that in your head are associated with a number of very simple things, right? There are people in that story. There is a place in that story. There is a problem in that story. And there is a way that the world is different after the events of the story. If I've been able to communicate to you the people associated with an experience, the place where the experience took place, the problem that gave rise to the story, the thing that we're trying to overcome, and if I can give you a sense of the way that the world is different after the events of the story, then I've done my job.
Being a storyteller is simpler than we think. For a good story, we just need to set the scene, name the people, tell what happened, and explain why it mattered. Story accomplished. And if you're drawing a blank on where to begin, use photos or souvenirs or knickknacks to jog your memory. You'd be amazed at the power of a cheap gift shop magnet to conjure up all sorts of tales. I know we've talked about how much stories matter in understanding our families and ourselves, but can I just make another plug for the power of storytelling? One of the greatest gifts you can give anyone is to share a story with them about someone they have lost or that they miss. Just the other day, I was across the country and a stranger came up to me and said, "I know that we don't know each other well, but I have this great story about your late husband and I want to tell you." That stranger not only gave me a story that I had never heard, but they gave me a new memory with my late husband, something that I could share with my children who want to know all the stories. Something I didn't think was possible when I lost him several years ago. Now that's a pretty powerful plot twist. Once upon a time, Sam and Lisa sat down in a studio to talk about stories because so many of their friends didn't know that storytelling has power or that everyone can be a storyteller. And so their friends started sharing memories with their families, and they shared experiences in the car with their kids, and they asked others how they remembered things happening. They marveled at the things they learned about history and people and life and themselves. And so they continued telling their tales, happily ever after. And there, I just told you a story. See how easy it is? Shauna Valentine, would be so proud.
The Lisa Show is a production of BYU Radio, hosted by Lisa Valentine Clark. This episode was produced by Erica Price, with help from Becca Hurley-Lung, Blake Morse, and Kenny Mears, with post-production by Gracie Davis. A special thanks to today's guest, Sam Payne. Sam is the host of another great BYU Radio podcast, The Appleseed. A link to The Appleseed, a storytelling podcast, will be in the show notes. Don't miss out on two other amazing podcasts from the Lisa Show family, The Council of Moms and Proofread, a new book review podcast to help you read more of what you love. You can find The Council of Moms and Proofread on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. As always, thanks for your messages. We read them all, and thanks for listening.
Hi, it's Lisa from The Lisa Show. And if you want to hear another great show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, check out Constant Wonder. Host Marcus Smith takes you on an exhilarating journey through captivating stories of our magnificent natural world. You'll gain profound insight into different facets of our planet. Prepare to discover more about nature and perhaps even ponder your connection to Earth's wonder. Constant Wonder. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.